Hello, Culture Matters podcast. This is going to be fun. Before I make our introduction to our guest, for our guest, here is a quote I picked just for this episode. Think like a man of action, act like a man of thought. Henri Bergson, one of my favorite philosophers, just like our guest today, one of my favorite health optimization advisors, Dr. David Yerkes. Yerkes, not Yerkes. Oh my God, I just had like a brain fart.
Yes, it's Yerkes.
I must not be optimized. By the way, definitely not. Mentor to me when it comes to health, wellness, friend of the Culture Matters podcast. If you're interested in functioning at a higher level, you're a business owner, entrepreneur, podcaster, pay close attention. Go listen to some of the other episodes in the Culture Matters podcast where we go deep into health optimization, nutrition, wellness. But essentially, Dr. David works in a proactive way to help his clients take grip, take the reins of their life. They want to be successful. Something just as a note, I found the most successful people we've had the pleasure of serving, they have people like Dr. David on their team, essentially flying them out, checking their vitals, all these things. Okay, the infomercial is done. I'm just passionate about this stuff. Thanks for coming back to the show.
Thank you for having me. Yes, always a pleasure. And like we say, we could do this for fun, but why not just record it? So I love having these conversations with you. And I remember our very first conversation. I was like, man, I just really enjoyed talking to that guy.
Real success.
Yes, yeah. And I noticed how intently you were listening. And so it was, but then you shared some of your story with me, and so I thought that was really neat, and that was extremely intriguing to me because it kind of touched on one of my life curiosities, which is what makes people tick, what makes people make the decisions they make, and choose the paths that they choose. And a lot of it's obviously multifactorial. There's environmental factors, and there's personality and genetics even, and just life circumstances and happenstance. But also we see sometimes that people with very, very similar backgrounds make very dissimilar choices and end up with very dissimilar outcomes. So it's not all homogenous, based on our experiences and backgrounds. So I just have this this ongoing curiosity about people and what makes them them.
Is that part of the inspiration behind the podcast?
That is one of the main inspirations, yes, behind the podcast, because it's kind of twofold. So it's that what I literally just described, but it's also one of the things that I have noticed throughout my career in different spaces: leadership, military, discipline, personal development, all these relationships, even religion. There's a lot of very similar concepts of success and how to become successful. And success is a big buzzword and everything like that. But really, what I noticed was all these different genres, there's very similar principles that apply. And if you can apply those principles to multiple areas, and health, I left out health, So you have a business person that's applying these principles to their business, but they may not be applying them to their health. And so, but one of the things I wanted to do was just kind of talk about all those things and kind of bring it all together and see how it's kind of, all encompassing for many different areas of our life. So that was kind of the other inspiration, is just talking to those folks and kind of seeing what people from different areas of life and that have been successful in different areas of life have done, what drives them, what motivates them, and then what principles they live by, and how similar those principles are in, different genres of life. It's
What's the
kind of
show
esoteric, but
called?
so the name of the show is called Daring Greatly, and that's a kind of an homage to the one of my favorite quotes of all time, which is the Man in the Arena speech by Theodore Roosevelt. And one of the last lines he said, he's going around, he's going through, he's talking about the man in the arena is, there's critics, right? And they're criticizing this person who's going out and trying, but they're not the ones that's putting in the blood, sweat, and tears, essentially. And he says, even if he fails at the end, he says, even if he fails, at least he failed by while daring greatly. And so, and not just, not trying. I'm butchering the quote, but it's an homage to that quote, which is I get emotional every time I read it. So it's kind of a reminder to myself almost to continue to have grit and that I'm doing something with purpose and to continue doing that. So daring greatly.
Was there an experience where you did not?
Well, I'm sure there is. I don't really think about it that much because I tend to be one that just puts one foot in front of the other. There definitely have been times that I've doubted myself. I remember when I was in community college, my first 2 years of college, I went to community college because it was $615 for tuition.
Wow, that's it. I might have gone
for an entire
Damn.
semester. And I remember asking my organic chemistry teacher if she thought I was smart enough to be a doctor. And she said, I don't know. So, I mean, because I didn't know any doctors. I didn't know anybody. I mean, I was doing well, but I didn't know. I mean, I'm like, do I have what it takes? I have no idea I don't even know what it takes. So I just I just looked up my, the classes that were required for prerequisites, and I signed up for those classes and I did the best I could. And, fortunately I was able to make it. And, so, but there's definitely been times that, oh, absolutely. There's been times I haven't, I can think of plenty of instances where I haven't necessarily, performed to my best or have been even disappointed in myself for not doing my best. Cause that's the most important thing. And that's what I try to teach my children is like, did you do your best? Not what was the outcome, but did you do your best? And did you give your best effort? And there's been times I haven't done that, but I think we're all human. So I don't beat myself over the head too bad about it. I just continue to try to make progress and grow. And I think that's the most important thing, at least for me, is just to continue to grow, learn. There are no losses, only lessons. So that's kind of my mindset.
For those who've studied, what drives a lot of these people?
I think it's
These
different.
Teddy Roosevelts.
Yeah, I think it's different. I think a lot of people, honestly, one of the more common themes I've seen is some form of trauma. And I hate to overuse that word, but it is usually some form of difficulty, we'll say, challenges, some kind of difficulty, especially growing up. And definitely not having something that wasn't easy but to varying degrees. Some people it truly is trauma. And some people it's just, I want more. I wanted more. I always knew I was meant for more. And, I think for me, I'm kind of somewhere in the middle. I wouldn't say I had a lot of trauma growing up, but I definitely had some challenging times, some very challenging times, as a young man, as a young adult. And I think that, but I think that's a good thing. I think if it makes us who we are, it shows us what we're capable of. And, I think one of the worst things you can do is give your children an easy life. There's a quote about that. Don't rob your children. Have you heard that one? It says something like, don't rob your children of the satisfaction by giving them an easy life or something like that. But
Makes sense to me.
yeah, it's I wish I'm the ultimate quote butcherer. I always have to look them up. But I've got the gist of it. I need to be, that's one of the things I can improve upon. I've identified something I can improve on. So it being more particular about remembering quotes and who said them. I
It's hard.
noticed, you know, I was
I
at,
tend to reuse a lot of the ones that I just remembered.
I was at a conference recently with Brandon Adams, and one of the guys that was speaking was James
Shout
Witt.
out to Brandon. He's been on the show.
Yeah. Yeah.
Episode. I remember the episode as well as you remember the quotes. It's in the 160s for
So
anyone listening to this.
James Witt, was Whitaker, I believe, was one of the kind of co-hosts, and I noticed every time he said, I mean, a book was mentioned, a quote was mentioned, he knew the exact quote, and he knew who said it, he knew the book, and he knew who wrote it. And I was like, man, that is really impressive. That was something I want to strive to be better at in my life. But that was something I noticed. So I got a little bit off track. I got a little off topic there, but that just reminded me of that. Like, that was impactful to me mentally.
How important is understanding who one is when it comes to even optimizing their health, you think?
How could you read? I'm sorry. Could you read? How important is
Is it for one to understand who they are
mm,
as it relates to optimizing their health?
ooh, yeah, that's a
If
good, yeah.
if a connection at all.
No, I think it definitely has a connection, because I think it goes back to sometimes feeling like you deserve it. And sometimes we self-sabotage. Sometimes people self-sabotage their own success, maybe even financially or in business or something like that, because deep down they don't feel worthy. And so they start to get close to success, and then they self-sabotage. And I think you can do that. Again, this goes back to similar principles in different genres of life, right? So I think you can do that for your health too. I think people definitely do that too. And there's a lot of reasons why people partake in what you would call adverse health behaviors or something like that. But usually, I mean, psychological
Yeah,
health,
as I drink the 5 hour energy.
you're on the go, man. You are seriously
I like to
at
be
the
up.
one of the people that goes hard for sure. So, but I think health behaviors, or productive health behaviors, it's almost like a process. You have to really kind of discover
Yeah.
that what the impact it has on you. Or unfortunately, as human beings, we end up a lot of times having to have some kind of negative consequence before we realize that. And sometimes it's a negative consequence for somebody that we love. Sometimes it's not even personal, but a lot of times that's the case, because it's not our default, right? Our brain is wired for comfort, and comfort is bad for us. So it's easy to abuse our sleep when we're working hard, right? It's like, well, I just got to work hard, and that I can sleep when I dead mentality is actually uh, horribly toxic to your health. But I mean, I've abused my sleep in the past too. I mean, we've all done it. The only thing you can do is try to, and once you have that realization, just do the best you can going forward. So
You
I,
know, what worked for me is to if I read before bed versus watch even a lecture or a documentary, like discipline, because after 13, 14 hours of reading, listening, interviewing, meeting, speaking, all the, every day, 7 days a week, at the end of the day, up at 5 or 6 and done at 8:30. Sometimes I'll want to, or I'll be, I don't want to do this. I'm pushed to it from an impulse to do something like watch. And I'm not watching television. It's been years now, over a year, not watching TV or movies, but like for some type of, that impulse gets manifested into like a documentary or something educational that I justified that's not in that bucket. I'm okay with that. Like, as long as it's not the television and the movies based on some esoteric subjective goal that was made up. But like, I have that pull to, I'm curious what you think of it, to do something easier on my brain or whatever, mind. And but if I do that, the likelihood I'm going to be up later is higher.
So you're
So
saying when you
reading 10, 20 pages is more difficult than watching something. By then, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that because I've been engaged in mental activity for 13 hours or
so
what have you, whether I took a nap or not.
to clarify, you fall asleep easier when you watch television than you do if you read, or the other way
No,
around.
the other way around. Yeah. Like, I was sorry. I was like, two trains of thought were going at the same time. The impulse is to do something easier, but if
Mhm.
I do once again something harder, I'm going to fall asleep sooner.
Mhm. I think it's because if you're talking strictly about sleep,
Yeah,
you have a couple different factors at play there. One, you have a screen that is, unless you're wearing blue light blocking glasses and have a really dark environment, you're still getting blue light to those melanopsin cells, which are blocking your body's ability to produce melatonin. So that's one factor.
that's
So if you're
good.
watching a screen, the other factor is reading is somewhat calming, and there's, it's probably one of the more relaxing type of activities mentally, even though you feel like you're being productive, if you will, by reading, and it's mentally stimulating for you more so than watching the television. Um, it's still not as engaging as may, or even as engaging may not even be the word, as maybe like a television show would be, as mentally stimulating as a television show, even though it is more productive, if you will, or
No, interesting. Yeah,
so yeah, so you're not your brain isn't as active in that role. Another thing that you can do that is actually
because it makes you tired.
yes, it does, because you're actually already tired. It's just allowing you
Well,
to be
it's
tired.
like, would you consider it more of it's a harder workout for your brain
I think that's I
that has
might
less
be
stimulus?
I think it's less stimulating. It's less stimulating to your brain than the television.
Stimulation isn't necessarily
Well, not when you're
enhancing.
yeah, right, exactly.
They're not causally linked.
Exactly. So just because the something is more
Oh,
stimulating,
analogy would be like eating popcorn versus eating a protein,
right,
like a chicken, whole chicken or something.
right, right,
6 ounces of chicken is better than eating popcorn.
right. Yes.
Oh, go ahead. So the melatonin's blocked by the TV.
But another way to kind of, we're talking about like how to sometimes just essentially let your brain, because it is perfectly normal and it's okay to not want to continually do, you
Yeah,
know,
well, I'm really hard on myself on that.
high,
I don't
high,
want to stop learning. I don't want to stop. I have a lot to do.
but you also, there's a limit to your brain's ability to even how much it can do in a day, how many critical decisions you can make in a day, and how much you can even absorb in a day. Now, reading before bed is great because you learn it better, and if you are getting good sleep, that's all well and good. Another thing you can do that a lot of people do is journal before bed. A lot of people journal in the morning, but journaling before bed helps you kind of mind dump some of those things that are kind of looping in your brain, that your brain is kind of trying to to hold on to, because you don't either it's hanging out there or you're thinking about it. If you journal and kind of jot some of those things down on paper, it allows your brain to kind of release that, and then it's actually relaxing to you, even if you don't recognize it. So
That's
that's
funny because I do that. So my whole office is generally covered in paper on the floor and the walls of writing. You think that's because I'm trying to get anxiety out of my body?
yes. I try to, anytime I have a thought or an idea, I document it somehow, because one, it's often fleeting and I won't think of it again. So it's a momentary. So I try to get that. I use my Apple Watch actually. I do voice memos on my Apple Watch a lot, but I'll put it down somewhere. But yeah, before bed, some people make a practice of journaling, and
And
that
now I'm
allows.
getting up earlier. I'm making standing meetings at 6 a.m. except Thursday with people, whether it's a work strategy meeting at 6 or 6:30 or 7, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And this will be definitely through 24, probably 25, especially in this current climate. And that's leading me to want to go to bed earlier so I can get up at that time. So if I'm done at 8:30 with work, I can go to bed at 9:30 and then get up. My body's starting to feel good about getting up at 5:36 or 5.
When do
And
you
then that
feel?
meeting starts. I'm not going to get up because I don't have to do what I don't want to do. That's not helpful without an accountability. The accountability is some kind of work obligation, because I'm not the type of person that gets up, meditates, does all that stuff. I'm just hyper productive all day. I don't need to be. My whole life is a meditation. That's why I do this type of work, is for my mental state, or else I'd be in an asylum or an addict, I believe. So my whole day is a meditation. Some people are like, they're waking up and they're meditating and they're doing all these things to get themselves ready for the day. My whole life is a meditation. So it's just
I get anxious.
14 hours a day. It's just
My morning
meditating.
takes too long. I can't have a super long morning routine. I get not anxious, but I get
There's
anxious.
no reason for me to have a morning routine because my whole day is a morning routine. It's just reading, writing, listening to people and telling people what I think.
Yeah.
It's my whole life, right? It's like
Yeah.
7 days a week, it's 365. The whole thing's a meditation. So I'm well, right?
Right.
It's
Right.
it's it's well, it's just, and what's interesting, when I was operating a business that was not dedicated to advisory work, consulting, all that, like, oh my God, you should have seen how that impacted my psyche. It was like I'll go 3 days with no sleep, and then or 4 or 5, and then sleep for a whole day, 25, 26 hours. Because how my brain, or how whatever I'm built, it wasn't built to fit anything other than what I'm doing, I think. And my
Oh, right.
partner's
I
like,
see.
where'd Jay go? Like, what happened? Because it was like a lightning bolt. Not a lightning bolt, like I would have tremendous energy for like 3 days.
Mm-hmm. I got you.
And you could feel it from, the next block. And then where did he go? Dude, I'm literally asleep for a day and a half.
Mm.
No drugs, no alcohol, just natural.
Yeah. And you
So I
do.
think I was born to do the work we do.
And when you're young, you can do that a little bit more too. As you start to age, that it takes, you notice those effects. So when you're young, you still have the negative effects. We talked about this on a couple shows ago. Um, when you're young, you can have sleep deprivation that you don't notice, and when you're old, older, like me, I'm
Sure.
41. You start noticing those effects a little sooner. But even when if you're sleep deprived, you have performance effects, negative performance effects, even if you don't recognize it.
Well,
And
yeah, what happens is like, oh, it's kind of hard to explain it. It's kind of like being drunk, but you're awake.
Right.
And if you have tons of ideas, I mean, you ever, dude, there's a great book on this, In Search of Clinton. Bill Clinton, man, the way he worked was nuts. He would fall asleep talking to people. He would eat like 20 cookies when he got hungry, then wouldn't eat for a day. It's called In Search of Bill Clinton. It's a epic about his
Interesting.
whole
Yeah.
work flow. How he worked basically was like
Right.
a thunderstorm.
Right.
Roosevelt too. I haven't read his. I really want to read his biographies,
Yeah.
but they're so intimidating.
A lot of high performers have operated in almost in spite of have had some high performance in spite of not being in the optimal. But one of the things that we know now, like if you look at say a Formula One driver, you better believe that they are doing everything possible to regulate their sleep, to regulate their sleep their circadian rhythm and the chronobiology, and they're getting proper nutrition and all of those things. They're exercising because they know that just small differences can make a big difference in performance. What I think a lot of business people and entrepreneurs fail to recognize is that your brain is also very sensitive to that. You're just not recognizing it. Like you said, it's almost like being drunk, where you might drive over the legal limit where all the data is very, very clear. You're impaired, but you don't think you're impaired, right? So this is very, and in fact, there's a lot of data on how similar sleep deprivation is to being drunk. So, and sleep is just one aspect of it. There's a lot of other aspects. Of course, I tend to go back to sleep because it's one of the more commonly abused. Sleep deprivation is more common, especially in the high performing, high stress jobs, people that are entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, or CEOs and executives tend to sacrifice that. And there are times when that may be necessary. You're not always. Sometimes, if you got to be functioning at 80% to finish up a deadline, it is what it is, right? I'm not saying that it's
Well, yeah, I
all
mean,
or nothing, and
you
we've
don't
all
go to
done it,
bed just because you're tired if there's a Cuban Missile Crisis,
right? Exactly.
unless you're just an entitled fuck.
Right. Exactly. So I don't want to sound like I'm being,
Yeah, I
I'm
don't think you're
saying that,
coming. It doesn't have
but
to be an either or.
on a regular basis, but it depends. And it's like the dose makes the poison, right? Just like I've said, a bunch of times, the dose makes the poison. So the more often you do it, the more chronically you do it, the
I
more
think I used to,
severely.
in my adolescence, tell people like I want to burn out like a fire, fire, like a sparkler,
Like,
spark. Yeah, in fact, the S in Culture Matters, like one of the was sparkle. No, twinkle, never mind. One of the T's.
hmm.
Twinkle. I don't recall what it stands for anymore because it's been so long since I had those meetings where we used to talk about each of the values.
You had a word for each.
Still
Yeah.
do. It's in the back of 30 Days of Thought. I mean, maybe we'll evangelize one of the, these shows and talk about them, but I don't remember what Twinkle was. But no, it's definitely not good for living.
Right. And
Like if you want to live.
and I'm also not a teetotaler health person. Like obviously there's what the science says about what you should do to be in optimal health. But you
This would be something I'm really curious to pick your brain when you're interviewing these people.
mm-hmm. Yeah. So we want to. So
Like case
basically,
studies.
here's an example. We know that being at a high level of cardiovascular fitness with a high VO2 max for your age decreases your or decreases your risk of death by about 5-fold, right? Smoking increases your risk of death by about 2-fold. So if that comparatively, it's more than double the benefit of smoking is the detriment. But how do you practically apply that? Is everybody going to go out and train like an Olympic athlete? If you're running a company, do you have time to train like an Olympic athlete? Probably not, right? So where do you find that compromise? That's one of the things that I enjoy doing for people is I enjoy helping them maximize their time and maximize their efforts so they're getting the most benefit from what they're doing and still able to live the life that, is actually worth living. Does that make sense?
I think that's a very well, I believe you. Yeah, I think that's what you believe, and I think there's likely people that really would benefit from what you're about. Um, I think depending on the day and my mood, some days I want to run, like run, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and it's kind of crazy. It's so exciting, and it's like being 1,000 miles an hour, and there's going to be a crash.
You're saying run like figuratively speaking?
Yeah, not fit, run. Where the hell am I going?
Yeah.
I'll walk on a treadmill on an incline.
No, I get you. You want to just go and go
Intensity.
hard. You
Yeah,
want
and
to just
even
go hard.
sometimes I don't want to physically read because I'd rather, listening to a book, maybe I could walk around. And I don't think I'm alone. A lot of entrepreneurs I've interviewed, they don't fit into that box and how they learn, how
Mm-hmm.
they think, how they process. I'll say that the structure, though, my mental health or longevity is so, I think, is more healthy than it's ever been because of some of the principles that you discuss. Just like I said earlier, I'm not going 3 days and then crashing, and and the business really is a reflection of this meditation. What do I need to do to be healthy, to not
Yes.
be in that state? Now, at the same time, maybe Clinton's going to come out again.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I mean, we'll see.
And
If I get so much energy being around people, it's crazy. It's like
one
a
of the
bomb.
one of the things that I think about, so with somebody like you who definitely has those tendencies, and that can be a good thing. And as long as it's under control and isn't so excessive that it's causing a detriment, because you could have detrimental health effects now, even at your age. uh and I mean, you could have a stroke even with from AFib. You could There's a lot of things that could happen. When we say performance, we think about, cognitive performance. You feel like you might be functioning at 89%, or you might be functioning at 95%. So what if I can go from 95 to 97%? What am I giving up? But there's more than that. So you can get to the point where if you're going so hard and you're not taking care of yourself physically, you can have significant health problems.
I could see that in people.
Yeah. And so like what's the risk of, say because your brain is a very metabolic organ. It's about 2% to I think 2% of our body weight, and it's about 25% of our energy consumption. So your brain really needs that. What if you were to go so hard that you were to, so like dementia, or something like that, and that's a big thing that I see a lot of in the hospital. And that's one of the key chronic illnesses that I saw a lot of that was really frustrating to me, because we're finding out that dementia, sometimes you can't avoid it, but there are a lot of things that really increase your risk of dementia. And so all of these health behaviors that are good for us also decreasing our risk of dementia. So sleep, exercise, proper nutrition, all those things. And we could get into a whole long topic on all the mechanisms of that. But the long story short is like your brain is your livelihood, right? It's where you really thrive and enjoy using your brain, right? You enjoy using your mind, and but you have to guard it too. So that, and not just in the short term, but in the midterm and the long term too, right? Because you could live. It's not just longevity is not just about living longer, right? It's about living well longer. And these years go by fast, and sometimes things creep up on you. So that's what I see. And when I see people that end up with this stuff, I can't help but feel this, man, what
I
if
have
I
such a hard time. It's crazy. What do you think it is that I have such a hard time with
I don't
this?
know. I can relate to it because I mean, for me, it's easier to change the behavior, the negative health behaviors of going too hard, because I see the consequences every day of people that don't take care of themselves. So it's a constant, I get constantly reminded, right?
Yeah.
For somebody that doesn't get that, I can totally see,
Oh, fair.
right?
Well, the question, it's so interesting. Like, I mean,
Because
I think there's different types of people that don't take care of stuff. Like somebody that has no purpose in life that doesn't take care of themselves because they're on a consumption treadmill is different than somebody that has a purpose so big they can't breathe without living it. That's in a creation mode.
yes, I had
And
to
so
argue
like
with
I'm
myself.
such a creator that
I
it's almost like there's a delusion of man, dementia, not afraid of that. I welcome that. It's almost like there's this crazy loud voice that's saying you have so much to do and so much to say, and um there's a defensive emotion of you know can't relate to that, can't relate to that, uninterested in that, don't have time to think about that.
Mhm. Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not making an argument that's
No, I actually
a truism or some kind of objective.
I understand where you're coming from.
I'm not making an argument like that's the way
I'll tell
anyone
you,
listening to this, don't lean on me for advice on this topic. What I'm saying, I'm
you're
explaining
just
my
sharing your truth.
the autobiographical impulse is like it's like a deep rage almost even.
I
Rage
don't think
against the idea of doing anything that could potentially encumber these delusions of grandeur.
Have you always felt that way? Have you always had that? When did that when did you start noticing that kind of, we've talked a little bit about your history, but when did you start really noticing that super drive?
I never I never doubted that I would do great things in the world. I always had this deep thought that I was called to something. Although I do believe, like, since the first I can remember being conscious, but I do believe that the environment by which I was fostered uh, in promoted a repression for a period of time of the focus that came as an outcome of when I was in my late teens and I was on my own.
Are you afraid
My
of
drive blossomed at that point. So
not fulfilling your purpose if you don't
no fear.
this?
There's no doubt that it's going to be fulfilled. I mean, it's hard to explain. No, not a fear. I mean, ask me that again in 10 years. And if I'm a healthy, or if there's some level of normality to my psychology, then I'd be in some level of midlife Eric Erickson's cycle. So ask me that again in 10 years, but
I'm curious about,
deep.
you don't even, it almost sounds like you just know it's there. You can't necessarily
It's
know.
like a whisper.
Yeah.
And there's no unquestioning certainty about it. Um,
Right.
Everything's always come easy and natural. That's not helped me in a lot of ways. I wish I wasn't so entitled in my adolescence, and I wish I regret not applying myself perpetually. At one point, I checked out, and I lost so many years of focus. And but yeah, there's this impulse to devour information and to devour and solve problems, and in my own way. Um, that's always existed. Entrepreneurship has been the vehicle, and I
Mhm.
think that's also how I was brought up, who I admired as role models, and who I wanted love from. So, but yeah, it's just gotten louder and louder as I've aged. Um, I want to put that to use and do good things in the world, as opposed to be too self-centered and or arrogant and self-consuming. So try to help people every day. I mean, and I hope generally the show is me leaning into people and attempting to help them think with my thoughtfulness. Like that intensity you talked about when you first met me, it's because I've been in a season of like leaning in. It's the complete inversion of what I once was, which was I would hug people so hard metaphorically with my words that I would kill them, would break them. I was a speaker as a result.
Uh,
So it was like overwhelmingly uh,
I think that's a young man. I think that's a young man. A lot of young men are very much that way. We have a lot to say as young men, and then as we mature and we move along that Dunning-Kruger curve, and we realize the more you know, the more you don't realize you don't know.
there's something to that. I mean, the founder psychology has to believe they know what other people don't know, or they will not exist in the marketplace.
Right.
The executive officer is going to have to be Socrates. The more I know, the more I don't know, so they can help other people think and actualize their purpose.
Right.
And
Right.
yeah, there's something to that for sure. Um,
And then you get a little bit more interested in listening, as
then
you.
again, one doesn't need to do great things in this world. I wouldn't consider Elon Musk a therapeutic leader. I would consider him a genius, savant, worker, you know,
But he has
based on
people around him. I guarantee you, he has people around him that are great listeners, because you can't be, well, I don't know, maybe not, but I believe
well, I
you
wouldn't
have
argue
to,
that.
in a,
Sure.
in a, in an organization, you have to have leadership that has good listening skills. And you don't have to be a ooey gooey listener, right? But you have to be able to hear.
It depends on the slave. It depends on the slave psychology of the ownership.
Mhm.
If the founding principle is a slave to their business, like they're there,
Mhm.
they could be a tyrant and that thing will succeed. You see this any dictatorship. So I often say, like, culture doesn't matter unless you want to be the type of owner or employee that values people.
And then those organizations ultimately fail. If we're talking
People
about
have to
free
make a
market society.
choice.
Yeah, because
Well,
you,
even the ones that aren't like that. I mean, you go far enough in history.
right, there's a life cycle to everything, I guess is what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, and like I'm not making an argument. I mean, clearly I'm not going to make an argument for that's why it's like how we relate to each other matters.
Mhm.
I can speak for myself. What type of leader do I want to be? Do I have more meaning in my life? In a lot of ways, I have more, but I go back and forth, you know. But that's why you have, there's a time to speak and a time to listen. like a conversation. If you're going to be present with someone fully, there's a time to speak and a time to listen. It's just, I think it's just as unfair to people for me to only listen as it was for me to believe I only talked. And I'm still trying to figure out how to walk. I'm still trying to figure out how to crawl, and hopefully I'll be able to start walking soon.
I agree with you on that. I think if and that's part of just personal growth, right? Just figuring out when those times are and how to balance that and in your personal conversations. And it's different with every conversation you have, probably, because some people you have to maybe do a little bit more or less of, depending on, and again, that's just part of all of our personal development, if we care to do that, right? Learning that balance and seeing ourselves and being self-aware enough to recognize I'm over speaking, or I need to give this other person a chance to talk and hear what they have to say. I think that's just a process. For me, it is anyways. That's one of the things I've been working on, because I was like you when I was younger. I just wanted to, just talk and tell everybody else what I thought. So I'm working on it.
In closing, what do you think? What do you think? What have we accomplished?
Well, so we started off talking about the podcast, about podcasting, and um, you know, okay, in closing, this is what I would say. My podcast is still in the infancy phase, and I have a lot of thoughts and ideas about it. And the only thing lacking now is action. And so the true, and again, this is another quote I'm going to butcher, but the true measure of intelligence is action. And that's how I would leave it.